El Salvador is important for the United States because it's really the victory of a successful peace through strength policy that President Reagan had in the 1980s. When he assumed office in early 1981, he said he was going to draw the line against communist expansion in El Salvador. It was not going to spread beyond Nicaragua. He was going to take all the resources possible of the United States to prevent a communist revolution from taking place in El Salvador. And the main enemy in El Salvador at the time was the communist Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, or FMLN, by its Spanish initials. Farabundo Martí was a Stalin Comintern agent in the 1930s who started a bloody revolution. Tens of thousands of people were killed. The FMLN was founded in 1980 in Cuba of 5 different communist factions, and to become one unified guerrilla force to receive East German and Soviet and Cuban and Sandinista support to bring the revolution to El Salvador. So it was a hugely successful story, not only of defeating a communist insurgency at the height of the Cold War, but in winning the peace afterward. We can't let the Hugo Chavez model of subversive revolution through manipulating democratic structures and processes to succeed any further. And we have to draw the line in El Salvador once again and not allow the FMLN to consolidate and to turn that country, to reverse all of the important reforms in that country, but also to prevent Chavez and Chavez types from that big propaganda victory that they really won, of finally undoing something that Ronald Reagan had fought to build and preserve. Well, this is a report on the March 15th, 2009 elections in El Salvador, where I was an official observer for the Arena Party. That's the ruling conservative party that won the war against the FMLN guerrillas in the late 80s. And they've ruled the country since then. And it was a very interesting election because it was almost a 50-50 split in the country between the Arena Party and the FMLN, which is the old communist guerrilla group that's reconstituted itself as a political party. And for the first time ever, the FMLN won a free and fair election in El Salvador, only by 60,000 votes, but it was still a victory for the far left. There was one key element of the campaign that was a problematic issue for Salvadoran democracy, and that is that the campaign was extensively funded outside by the Venezuelan regime of Hugo Chavez. So it's a question of an anti-democratic regime funding a former communist guerrilla group to take power democratically. The United States praised this as a victory for democracy. A lot of Salvadorans call it a victory for democracy. It's really a victory for anti-U.S. revolutionary forces in the region, so it constitutes a real danger. The upside of it, though, it's not all necessarily a bad thing, because the winning candidate, Mauricio Funes, is not a communist like the party itself. He's a former CNN Spanish correspondent. He's a famous talk show host in El Salvador, but he's not a Marxist. He's just a liberal who wanted a political party, and there was only one other party besides the conservatives in El Salvador, and that was the FMLN. So Funes doesn't control his party. He doesn't control anybody on the political council. He's not even on the political council that governs party policy. He doesn't control any of the deputies in the National Assembly. All that is in control of a man named Salvador Sanchez Seren, his vice president-elect, whose nom de guerre during the war was Leonel Gonzalez. He was one of the 5 comandantes of the FMLN guerrillas. And if I can say one good thing about Sanchez Seren, is that he has killed more of his own people in the FMLN than just about any other person anywhere. He killed as many as 1,000 or even 1,200 people within the FMLN during the war. So he has no problem battling fellow leftists when he has to, and the guy's got a lot of blood on his hands. So that's a danger for the FMLN, it's a danger for El Salvador, and it's also a big problem for the United States to have somebody like Salvador Sanchez Seren running the new ruling party in the country. But the good part is that President-elect Funes can be isolated from that. And if the conservatives, the Arena Party, and even some people on the center-left can get together and form a majority, they can prevent the FMLN from ruling the country and turning it into another Bolivia or another Venezuela. So not all is lost in that regard. On the international side, it was interesting to be down there to see who was actually helping the FMLN get its victory. There was the oil money that PDVSA, the Venezuelan state oil company, provided. They actually provided petroleum to an FMLN-controlled company in El Salvador and distributed that at gas stations run by municipalities of FMLN mayors. That was used to fund the party covertly. But to see, for example, to go around and see Nicaraguan SUVs, brand new Toyota SUVs with Nicaragua license plates and Sandinista stickers and Che Guevara stickers on them. These were some of the people who were going around the villages helping to organize the FMLN and helping to provide transportation for people to get to the polls and so forth. The Sandinistas brought along, at FMLN request, Muammar Gaddafi's personal representative to the Sandinistas in Nicaragua as an election observer in El Salvador. In the hotel where I stayed at, there were a lot of self-announced agents of the Venezuelan government there, of the Chavez government, to assist the FMLN in their elections. Some of these folks were Venezuelans, some were from Dominican Republic, some from Panama, and some from Nicaragua. And so they were staying all at our hotel and being very frank and open about who they were, who was backing them, and what they were trying to do. So the FMLN takes control of the country. The end of the presidential term is May 31st, so as of June 1st, the FMLN will assume the presidency of El Salvador. But it's also important to remember that in January, this is not a mandate for the FMLN to rule and to create a big change, because in January, the mayoral elections brought the conservative Arena party to power in San Salvador, the largest electoral district in the country. And the second most powerful political post in the country really is the mayor of mayor of San Salvador. The voters threw out the FMLN and brought in Arena to run the capital. That's going to be an interesting change. That change takes place on May 1st, a month after the new president comes in. And it's going to be interesting to see how Arena undoes a lot of the FMLN's more revolutionary style activities that they were running through the city government. One of the things that's a big issue right now, not big in terms of size, but big in terms of potential impact as a barometer of the change, is whether or not the new mayor of San Salvador is going to take down the statue of Yasser Arafat, which is on Jerusalem Avenue in Colonia Escalon. It was erected by the FMLN to honor Arafat in commemoration of his support for the communist guerrillas during the war. And it's there. It's been there pretty much unbothered for the past decade or so, but there is a move afoot to remove that statue and replace it with something more appropriate for somebody who is a strong defender of Salvadoran democracy like Ronald Reagan. So we'll see what's going to happen. I'm sure that once the Salvadoran mayor makes a move like that, the FMLN militants are going to do what they can to save Yasser Arafat and keep his legacy there. And these guys aren't beneath using mob rule and violence as they have in the past.